City of Mariupol. It was one of the biggest strategies of the Russian-Ukrainian war, and it has been on covers of most newspapers. Completely destroyed, demolished city. Russians made sure that there was nothing left of the city. And it's been like this for quite some time now, for actually since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, since the beginning of the Russian occupation. And Mariupol has become the sort of the poster child city, if you will, for what Russia uses in their propaganda machine, namely how Russia is taking care of the occupied territories. And because Mariupol has been so ridiculously demolished and has been so destroyed, it is easy to do something very, very small and very, very insignificant in reality, but proclaim it and show it and portray it as something, akin to a miracle and something akin to basically restoring the whole city. So today we're going to talk about a story how Russia is, quote unquote, rebuilding the city of Mariupol and, as they claim, rebuilding it for the people who stay there and who live there, but in reality does nothing of the sort. Just earns money and builds structures on top of actually people's corpses, if you will.
Yeah, and not only local Russia propaganda, they use it in international propaganda. They lots of paid Twitter bots, lots of paid Russian pundits abroad try to spread the idea that Russia is restoring the city. Look, the city is like rising up from the ashes. And even apart from, like, if you don't think about what they actually did, just destroyed the whole city for nothing, killed hundreds of thousands of people, which is horrible. And the city was good. It was flourishing before. You can see numerous videos online of how the city actually looked before the Russian full-scale invasion and how it looks now. But even a part of I don't know how to call it, the inhumanity of what Russia did, this restoration is actually a scam as well. And it is even worse than you think.
Yes, it is worse. So before we look into the really crappy and horrible stuff, let's start from the less crappy and horrible, nevertheless still horrible. So after the whole thing was done and after Mariupol was solidly occupied by the Russians and it was like there was nothing there, it doesn't even resemble a city anymore, still there are some people who live there. The decision was made by the people in the Kremlin and Russia to, give Mariupol to some Russian city so they could be in charge of that city. And that city happened to be St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg in and of itself is like a meme where, Russia actually uses the city as an excuse that they have culture. Whenever you hear about Russian culture, you always say St. Petersburg, like it's their ace.
Yeah, look, we have like 19th century buildings and they're like on the river, like in Venice and in Netherlands and like all this stuff. Yeah.
So they pretend it's a city, it's not even a thing. Anyway, St. Petersburg was kind of made the city to take care of Mariupol. And obviously what in Russian mind is taking care of Mariupol is not burying the people they murdered, is not looking for all the dead bodies that are underneath all the rubble. And believe me when I tell you, and this is a proven fact, just people died in those buildings and then buildings collapsed on top of them and nobody took care of these things. So the story of Mariupol in itself it's a horrible thing. And what makes the story even worse, the one we're talking about today, is that it's literally a story of a culture capital of Russia building structures on top of these dead people. So the thing is, they have found money and they have secured some money from their reserve budget from the city to build not the entire city, not to rebuild the infrastructure, but to kind of put a bunch of houses to pretend they're rebuilding something. Obviously all the contractors who rebuild Mariupol are the friends of a local governor Bihlov, who is very keen on being friends with Vladimir Putin. He wants to prove that he is a big friend of his and he's his loyal partner. So he does everything in these campaigns. And need I remind you that Putin or his bad copy actually visited Mariupol a couple of months ago to kind of observe the rebuilding. I mean, the entire, like, if it wasn't so horrible, if this entire thing wasn't so horrible, it would be even funny. But like, it's difficult to laugh at this, what looks like Putin, but probably isn't, because like, it's literally them taking pictures on top of this horrible genocidal mess that they made. So the thing is, they are doing something. And you would say, as any person would say, well, they are probably building these houses for people who stayed in Mariupol. And I need to remind you that there are still Ukrainians who lived in Mariupol for years and years, who were born in Mariupol, who still live there now in occupation. Mark, what do you think? Are these people going to receive homes?
Yeah, that's a horrible thing. They are not. And the videos are surfacing now of people trying to appeal to Vladimir Putin, try to ask the Russian government to help, because on top of their houses, where the houses were destroyed by Russian aviation, Russian tanks, their neighbors were killed and buried in the same yards where these houses stand. On top of these houses, Russians built like those, cheap Chinese atrocities of an architecture, like the worst new type of architecture you can ever find. It's usually found in some Chinese cities where they do this, extensive building of cheap houses just for people to buy them. And that's what the Russians are building in Mariupol. And people are coming to see these houses, coming to watch the opening of the newly built house on top of their house, just to find out that it's not theirs. And the apartments in this house are actually sold to some Russians who just want to living on the shore of the sea, and that's it.
How much more of this humiliation? Why treat people like this? This is the question. Help us, please. Vladimir Vladimirovich, we ask you.
And that's it. And that's where everything's gone. Like, one should say, like, most of those people are have pro-Russian views, and we're actually waiting for Russia to come to Mariupol and to occupy them, which is even more horrible part of it. But most of pro-Ukrainian people left because that's the only way you could survive it. But yeah.
So the way this goes is, imagine you owned an apartment in Mariupol. It's 17 meters square apartment. You were born there. Your parents gave you it, no matter what. Then it got destroyed, and you have what we have here in Ukraine, and the same thing you have in Russia is called registration address. It's the address that you are putting in your official documents as your kind of, it's like an anchor, or it's either you own it or you were born it. So every single person in Ukraine and in a lot of post-Soviet countries, we have this. It's called propiska. It's like a registration address. And what happened is these people are registered on, let's say, Rainbow Street in Mariupol. I'm just making this up. And the new house that's built on top of the destroyed house on Rainbow Street has a new address now. They have renamed the street, or put the address of this house as a parallel street or a perpendicular street to the Rainbow Street. So now officially, as a person who was registered that address, you are not registered there because this address does not exist. You used to have your address line where it went the name of the street, the number of the building, and the number of your apartment. And because the physical building that is on top of your old address is registered on a different address, you now have no claim whatsoever to the new apartment complex.
At the moment we are on Nahimova Avenue 82. Today there is an event, the distribution of apartments to the new mortgage holders, but not to the residents of this house. Here they stand, disenfranchised, without housing, hoping that someone will see them, hear them, and understand their pain and disappointment in what happened. People have lived in this house for 20 and more years, some since birth, 60, 70, 80 years. And this is unfair to this residents.
And obviously, these apartment complexes, you can get a mortgage on it, and Russians have been doing that. Russians who do not live in Mariupol, who don't even live in the vicinity, who solely see Mariupol as this, yes, vacation destination, a beautiful city at the seaside where you can buy like an apartment for your vacation. So, and by the way, this is also an argument when we talk about, how this is Putin's war, not Russia's war. Well, these people in Russia will gladly buy a holiday apartment in a city where hundreds of thousands of people were murdered by aviation bombs and by artillery. Isn't that a cultural country, Mark?
Yeah, the thing people don't really get about Russia is how sadistic and perverted it is in its cruelty. Because at the same time, this country can kill hundreds of thousands of people, destroy houses, do absolutely everything. The laws don't work there at all. But when they want, they will just insert some legal loopholes where they could just say these people to go fuck themselves, right? But they insert these little loopholes just to make it a little more like according to the law, a little more like looking like a normal thing, like a normal procedure or something like that. And that's what killing me. It's obvious what they did. Everyone knows what they did. People know what they did, and they insert these little things like with law and rules and something like that, and with like new governments, with new governors, with this Donetsk People's Republic, etc., and they make it like a little bit. It's like they are giving people hope that there's some kind of law which they could abide and which they could appeal to, but there's none, and it's the most terrifying thing to me, I guess.
And yes, and the same goes to even further when you look into who are the developers of these buildings. Moreover, if you are building a city where there was a genocide and you know what happened and you're going to earn money on it, it doesn't already speak about you as a very moral person, obviously. But then the people who take part in the rebuilding of Mariupol, even by Russian standards, are criminals to the craziest extent. For instance, Russia is a country that is not known for arresting corrupt officials, right, and corrupt businessmen. This is not what they do. This country solely exists, and it's all people exist to earn money so that the corrupt people can then steal from the people. So most contractors that rebuild, they are working. They're affiliated with state security and with very questionable businessmen and with the local governorate and with local officials. For instance, a company called Stroexpert, which does repair works on Mariupol Philharmonic Concert Hall, is owned by Denis Matuz and Galina Arhipova, who were in Russia taken into police custody in July for charges of embezzling public funds. So they were arrested, taken to the police. There's a case opened against them. Yet they still won a public competition to rebuild a city in occupied Ukraine, and then they're gonna get again public funds. They're gonna get either reimbursed or get some tax cuts. Yeah. So imagine a situation where you would allow on a state level convicted criminals to earn money on rebuilding a city that you yourself destroyed, occupied, and murdered people in. Doesn't that sound like a great Russian culture, Mark? Doesn't that sound like, St. Petersburg style kind of thing?
Yeah, that's exactly St. Petersburg style of thing. That's what we were talking about is like, atrocity on top of atrocity, on top of atrocity, on top of genocide, on top of genocide, on top of corruption, on top of genocide. And that's just like, why should we even discuss this? Why should we even prove to people anything anymore? It's like, this is the horrible, like this is the worst country in the world, like like maybe not the worst, but one of the worst, who's doing the worst atrocities since the World War II, who's doing the worst morally, I don't know, incomprehensible things which you could ever do, like, ISIS level shit. And yet the world is still discussing, like, oh yeah, well, what about Russian artists? Like, what about Russian sportsmen? Oh, we should let them participate in the Olympics. We should let them, do other stuff. We should lift the sanctions and probably buy gas from them or something like that. We should let them back as soon as they, I don't know, like make a ceasefire with Ukraine and remain in occupied territories or something. That's not. They're not going to change. It's going to remain the horrible place with horrible people who are doing the worst shit you could ever do to humanity. And that's it.
And the worst part is that a lot of our partners in the West like to fantasize about the fact that, well, someday Ukraine is going to deoccupy all these territories and is going to go to 1991 borders. Well, the only thing Ukraine has asked for during all this time is weapons to do it. And somehow the West was able to give Russia something that they never explicitly asked for, but nevertheless used very well. It was time. The West, by not giving Ukraine enough weapons, gave Russia time to start kind of settling in the occupied territories. And it's going to be ridiculously difficult. Even if somehow Ukraine, and I hope that someday, and I know for a fact someday Ukraine is going to actually do it, but it's going to take so much more effort. It's going to be so difficult for Ukraine to get rid of Russia in places where it's already settling down, building infrastructure, making business really. And coming back to the
hard.
Yes, and coming back to the whole thing, where do you think the people who used to own the apartments in Mariupol, where do you think they live? They live in these social housing that Russia it's temporary, that Russia provided them. They move to Russia. Some of them actually had to move to Russia. A lot of people were evacuated there. They will never see their home again. Most likely, this is what's going to happen. They're never going to get their apartments back, and the entire city is going to be filled in with Russians who are going to come there and spend vacations in the place where hundreds of thousands of people were murdered. And this is the genocidal policy that Russia leads. This is not the new thing. This is not a new thing. They have been replacing throughout their history. They have been replacing the entire lands, the entire population of lands. They were sending God knows how many people to Siberia, Crimean Tatars, Ukrainians, the entire time. This is how you do. You take the local indigenous population and you send them to God knows where, and then you bring all the Russians and you incentivize them to come there. And this is how you replace the people. And this is how you occupy the lands forever. And then after 35 years, you raise the question of, well, this land was always ours because Russians have lived there forever, even though they were transported there physically years before. They were never indigenous there. So this is what people should be thinking about, because this is an important matter. And this is not just a concept of, oh, look, well, at least Russia's rebuilding something. They're not rebuilding shit. They literally just built 2 or 3 houses or a couple of quarters on top of a city that used to be prosperous, flourishing, nice, and beautiful, full of happy people. And then they just destroyed all of that and put a bunch of houses where some distasteful, genocidal, loving Russian assholes are going to live and go bathe in the beautiful sea and not even think about what are they living on top of. This is the epitome of Russia, if you will. It doesn't get any better. This is just what they are and what would they forever be. This is what they did in Crimea. I mean, Crimea wasn't destroyed, but this is exactly what they did. People came to live there, bought apartments there and bought housing there, and did not care at all that this city, that this land was occupied and is actually a place of a crime. No, they don't care. They just live there because it's beautiful. It's nice Crimean Sea. Same goes for Mariupol.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll discuss how we deal with these Russians someday.
Also, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it, because we've shown you how many Russian propaganda tweets there are about the situation. It's important for there to be as many tweets and information that are truth. So please go ahead, share, and we will see you next week.
Bye.